Okay, for this activity, we're going to start off just with a little explanation. So I'm going to make a new comp. You actually don't have to follow this, you're just watching. And I'm just going to make some shapes. So I'll just add a new solid. This is all stuff you'll learn later on. I'll make it 100 by 100. And let's just say that we want it to be red. Okay. So that is called red solid 1. So I'm going to rename it to item 1, and then I'm going to duplicate it. So Command or Control D, and it's called itself item 2 automatically. And for item 2, I'm going to go to Layer, Solid Settings, and I'm going to set the color to blue. And I'm also just going to drag it out the way here. So I'm on this selection tool. I'm dragging it out the way. I'm going to go back to item 1 and duplicate, Command or Control D. That's now item 3. I'll put it at the top. I will drag it to this side and I'll set the color to green. Okay, so we've got these 3 layers, these 3 items. Now transforming is a simple process of moving, rotating, scaling, and changing a few properties about something. So if you go to a layer and you click on this little arrow, it will say you have some transform properties here. If I click on that, you'll see that there's 5 main transform properties. So the easy ones to understand are position, scale, and rotation. So as you would expect, if I just drag on the position value, I'm moving that red box left and right. So the first value is X, in other words, left and right. Let me undo that. The second value, so you'll see the first value, 960, is left and right, or the X axis. The second value is the Y axis, or up and down. And that's actually the same throughout After Effects. The first value is always X, and the second value is always Y. I have now just lost that green. Let me just go back and make this green. Something happened here. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. I'm just going to lock the other 2 layers so I don't accidentally select them. So position is easy to understand. Scale is also easy. If I just drag there, I can scale this up and down. If I unlink X and Y, I can change the X or the Y on their own. Rotation, there's 2 values here. The right hand value is degrees, the left hand value is full rotations, in other words 360 degrees. So if I drag on the right hand value, I'm changing it in smaller increments in degrees. If I drag on the left hand value, I'm literally just rotating it a full 360 degrees each time. So that's position, scale, and rotation. Opacity is the amount, is how see-through something is. So transparency is 0% opacity. So if I take that down, it becomes more see-through. And so 100% is completely opaque, or 0 transparency. Anchor point is an interesting one. This is the point around which an object transforms. So the anchor point by default is usually at the center of the object or the composition, depending on how you created it. So in this case, the anchor point, which you can see with this little target in the middle of the box, is the center of the object. Now if I change that, so I'm just going to drag on that value, you can see that the anchor point stays still, the object offsets to the anchor point by a certain value. So if I now go back and rotate, you can see transformations are happening relative to that anchor point. Now sometimes you want to move the anchor point without the object moving. In other words, the object stays still and the anchor point moves. And if you want to do that, there is a special tool up here called the Pan Behind Anchor Point tool. So it's a tool that actually does 2 functions. But what we're interested in is the anchor point side of it. So if I click on that, I can drag my anchor point without changing the object. Go back to my selection tool, always go back to your selection tool, and now you can see the object is rotating around that anchor point. Okay, so that's what anchor points are for. So those are your 5 transform properties. Now, if I close this up, the easiest way to remember is to remember the word traps, T-R-A-P-S. If I press T, I get my opacity value. If I press R, I get my rotation. If I press A, I get my anchor point. P, position, and S, scale. So if I just want to see one property, and it might seem like it's redundant for me to do it here, but when you've got hundreds of layers, and every single layer is showing all its transform properties, things can get chaotic. So it's sometimes good just to focus on what property you are going to be working with. So let's say that I wanted to work with position and scale, I could press P and then Shift S, and now I'm looking at just position and scale. If I want to get rid of scale, I hold down Shift and press S again. If I want to get rid of P, Shift P. So that's traps, which gives you the shortcuts to access all of your transform properties. You can do it the long way by clicking here as well. Okay, so the next thing is parenting objects. So sometimes you have an animation that's complex enough for you to need some help. So if I wanted to transform the red square and I wanted the other two squares to inherit the transform properties of the red square, that is a good candidate for parenting. So if you look here, if I take the blue square, let me unlock both of these. If I take the blue square and I parent it to the red square, and you parent it, here's the parent column. If you can't see the parent column, click on toggle switches and modes. Okay, in fact it's available in both modes, so it's always there. I can either click and choose who the parent is going to be, or I can use this little pick whip. Okay, that's the pick whip, and I can drag and point at the parent. So now it puts the name of the parent in that column. So what happens now is when I go back to the original object and I, for example, rotate it, you can see that the child object inherits the transform properties of the parent object. So the properties that are inherited are position, scale, and rotation only, not opacity and not anchor point. Okay, so if I do that, that's basically passing it down to item 2, but I can also create a hierarchy here. So if I take item 3 and I parent it to item 2, and then I go back to item 1 and I rotate, you can see that item 1 is passing its rotation values down to item 2, and item 2 is passing its rotation values down to item 3. But what that also means is if I take item 2 and rotate it, only item 3 is affected. So transform properties are inherited from parent to child, not the other way up the hierarchy. So only a child object will inherit the transform properties of a parent. So if I'm rotating at item 1 and item 2, item 3 will be inheriting 2 sets of transform properties from item 1 and from item 2. So this might seem a bit confusing, but I'm going to show you a little example here, and you can follow along just for practice. You will have these files. So I'm going to go to Open Project. I don't need to save this. And there is a folder in Activity 411 called Solar System, and there's a Solar System After Effects project file there. So what this is it's just a Milky Way background, which I can lock. It's a sun object, just a little picture which I can lock. It's an Earth picture, a moon picture, and then just a null object. Now a null object I can create just by right clicking here and going to New, Null Object, or I can go to Layer, New, Null Object. All that a null object is it's an empty layer, which allows me to do things like parent things to that empty layer so that I can achieve certain results. So if I just drag my playhead, can you see the way the null object is rotating in the center where the sun is, and the Earth is also rotating? So if I wanted to create a little animation here, let's say it's for a primary school project, and I just want to show the students that the Earth goes around the Sun and the Moon goes around the Earth. Obviously none of this is to scale here or accurate. It's just demonstrating that principle. So if I wanted to animate the Earth going around the Sun and the Moon going around the Earth, it would be very difficult without parenting, because I would have to actually manually try and make everything follow each other to make that work. So what I'm going to do is first of all parent the Earth to the null object, which is the object that's rotating. And if I want to see where these animation keyframes are, so you're going to learn all about animation in another learning unit. If I select this null object called center and I press U, that's called the Uber key, you'll see it shows me there's a keyframe at the beginning and a keyframe at the end, and the rotation property is what's been animated here, and I can see that at 0 seconds the rotation is 0, and at the keyframe at the end at 10 seconds the rotation is 4 full rotations. So that null object is rotating 4 times. Okay, so if I now parent the Earth layer to that center null object using the pick whip, and I then just drag my playhead, you can see now the Earth is going around that null object because it's parented to it. It's inheriting the rotation properties of that null object. Now I can go further because the Earth is rotating itself as well. So if I select the Earth layer and press U, I can see, yes, there are 2 keyframes there, and it's for rotation. And at 0 seconds it's at 0, and at 10 seconds it's at nearly 4 full rotations. So that will allow me to take the Moon object and parent it to the Earth. So the Earth is parented to the center, the Moon is parented to the Earth. So if I now drag my playhead and just click away so that you can see it better, you can see the Moon is going around the Earth and the Earth is going around the Sun. Okay, and that would be quite a difficult animation to do without using parenting. Okay, and while we're here, the U key, the Uber key, allows you to see keyframes or animated properties of a layer by pressing U. Just do that again. Moon hasn't got any animation. Let me go there, U, and I can see the keyframes. But if I press UU, it shows me all properties that have been transformed. So in this case, it's still only rotation. But if I, like Earth, UU, you can see it's not only got rotation, but also scale and position, and there's also a mask path there. So the UU shortcut shows you any properties that have been changed from default, and just U on its own shows you any animated properties. Okay, so that was a little bit of practice. You don't have to save this, you don't have to submit anything here. We're going to open something else that you're familiar with. So I'm going to say open project. I don't need to save this. And we're going back to activity 411, and it's this activity 411 start. Now, if you open it up and it doesn't find your media, you know that the media is saved in, let me just show you here. It's saved in theme 1 of learning unit 3. So we're not putting it over and over again every time we use it. So you're just going to go back here and reconnect up like you learned in a previous activity. So what we're going to do here is just prepare this and transform it a little bit so that you can see a more practical example. So we've got all these layers for this city reel comp. So that comp can be found in here, city reel, and we're going to do something to just make this easier for animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select film reel and go all the way down to clouds, hold down shift and click. So I've got all of those selected, and I'm going to pre-compose those because all of those are going to be part of one animation. So right click, pre-compose, and I'm just going to call this reel and move all attributes into the new composition, definitely, and then I'm also going to say open new composition and say OK. So now it opens that new composition, and here are all of those items. Now if I wanted to animate this, and we are going to do that, I want the little minibuses to be moving around on their own, and I want the background and the clouds to all be animating at different speeds to create this kind of interesting dynamic. And in order to do that, I need everything to kind of rotate around a center point. So I'm going to make a new null object, so layer, new, null object, and I'll just select it and hit enter, and I'll call this rotation control. And then I'm going to take everything in this comp, so select it all, and take any one of the pick whips and point at rotation control. So now if I go to that rotation control and just press R and I rotate, everything is rotating because it's parented to this object. Undo that, and if I press S for scale, everything scales. I'll undo that, and if I press P for position, everything moves. Okay, so that's a good setup for animation. So then I'm going to go back to the city reel composition. So nothing appears to have changed here, but now we've got all of those layers pre-composed into one composition layer, which is great because now we can transform that how we want to. So with that layer selected, I'm going to press S for scale, make sure the link icon is on so that it's scaling both on the X and the Y axis, and I'm going to scale this up to 200%. Then I'm going to press P for position, and I'm going to go to the Y axis, and I'm going to drag to move this down so the anchor point is sitting at the bottom there. Okay, so now I've got everything ready so that I can start animating when we get to the animation stage. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and see you next time.